And good evening. It's August 15th, 2024. And welcome to another one of our branches on the vine with the Bible Project, and of course their wonderful Sermon on the Mount series. The Bible Project created this series to cover the entire year. They release another episode every 5 weeks. And we're going to take some time to discuss these videos and some other creative topics that they present. The videos we will discuss are just the tip of the iceberg. They're part of a learning series that I highly recommend. They can all be found on the Bible Project app. Link to that is in the description. So, welcome this evening to episode 7 of Sermon on the Mount, Praying to Our Father on the Dusty Feet. And of course, before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, so when you click the subscribe button, reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, then click the like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people, if they wish. Again, this sermon is found in Matthew 5-7 and is, for me, the seminal moment in the teachings of Jesus. This is his longest, most profound, broadest teaching that we have recorded in all of Scripture. And it covers things that we love to talk about. Yet deep down, I think we really have challenges living. So the Sermon on the Mount, episode 7, Praying to Our Father. This is just our part 1. Let's take a watch of the video. Let's see where it takes us. Enjoy.
Prayer is based on this belief that we can somehow talk with the God of the universe, which is pretty mysterious. Where do you even start?
Well, at the very center of a collection of Jesus' teachings called the Sermon on the Mount, he taught his followers a simple prayer to adopt as their own. The prayer has 2 short halves, each with 3 requests. The first half focuses on God's purposes in the world, and then the second half addresses our concerns in day-to-day life.
So it's a short prayer.
It is, but this little prayer contains a whole new way to look at everything in the world.
Jesus begins the prayer this way: Our Father who is in the skies. So God lives in the sky?
Well, in the Bible, the skies or the heavens are a way of imagining God's universal power and presence that are above all things. In God's realm, God rules as the king whose will and purpose are always done.
But Jesus doesn't refer to God as king.
No, Jesus calls God our Father.
That's a bold thing to claim about the God of the universe.
It is. But a key claim in the Bible is that God has appointed humans as representatives and beloved children to embody God's wisdom and rule in the world.
But the story of the Bible is about humanity's disregard for this calling, how we make a mess of things.
And so the prayer continues. May your name be recognized as holy.
Now, holiness, that's a fancy religious word.
Sure. In the Bible, holy signifies God's one-of-a-kind status. God is the source of all reality and the author of life, and it's this God that calls the family of Israel out from among the nations and then attaches his holy name to them, setting them apart as holy representatives to all the other nations.
But just like all of humanity, they mess up this calling.
And that led to Israel's defeat and subjugation to many empires, bringing dishonor on God's holy name. But Israel's prophets, like Ezekiel, said that one day God would restore the holiness of his name among the nations.
How?
Well, by raising up a new representative who will restore God's rule over Israel and the world, so everyone can see how holy and good God really is. And that's who Jesus claimed to be when he went around announcing the arrival of God's kingdom.
And that makes sense of the next lines of the prayer. May your kingdom come, and may your will be done, as it is in the skies, so also on the land.
Jesus taught his followers that when we love God and our neighbor, when we treat others with God's generosity and justice, we are entering God's kingdom. And so this is a prayer for the reunion of heaven and earth, and we are invited to participate.
Okay, that's the first half of the prayer, focused on loving God and seeking his will.
The second half shifts to the challenges of daily life as we pray for God's kingdom to come.
Give us today our daily bread. That's as basic as it gets, asking God to provide food.
Yeah, Jesus is using an image from Israel's story when they journeyed through the wilderness and God provided just enough bread each day.
That's a tough place to be, not knowing where your next meal will come from.
And remember, Jesus' audience was filled with poor people struggling to get by during the Roman occupation. And so he invites them to join their ancestors in the wilderness, trusting God's provision each and every day.
Wow, okay. And the prayer continues. Forgive us our debts, as we also forgive those indebted to us.
Jesus made forgiveness central to his movement. He announced that God was forgiving Israel and all humanity for its long history of violence and greed, and so he calls his followers to do the same, to forgive those who hurt us.
But we can't go around forgiving everyone. I mean, won't evil spread unchecked? Won't people take advantage of you?
Well, for Jesus, the problem is that our desire for revenge just keeps the cycle of pain going. He taught that forgiveness begins with naming the wrongdoing, but then not seeking vengeance.
So that doesn't mean becoming best friends with the person who wronged you.
No, but it does mean releasing my right to get totally even with them, and even learning to pray for their well-being instead.
That kind of forgiveness requires radical trust in God.
Yes, Jesus invites us to see that forgiveness is like breathing. In order to truly receive and take in God's forgiveness, you have to be in the habit of giving it out. The two work together as one.
Finally, Jesus prays, "Don't lead us into the test, but deliver us from the evil one." So wait, God might test us?
Well, remember the biblical story, how God appoints humans as his representatives in ruling the world? That opportunity presents them with a choice.
Will they partner with God and rule by his wisdom?
But along with every choice, there's a voice whispering that we could do things our own way, by our own wisdom. And that voice twists the test into a trap and forces us to decide whose voice will we trust.
So Jesus invites us to ask if we can be spared from tests altogether. Like, can I just live a normal life, please?
But Jesus also knows that even normal life is full of choices that will force us to trust God or something else. And so when we find ourselves in a trial or a test, Jesus urges us to ask for protection from the evil one's lies.
And with that, the oldest form of the prayer comes to an end. Short and powerful.
But check this out. This is Jesus' own prayer that he prayed himself.
Really?
Yeah, the night before his execution, Jesus went to a garden to pray. And while he didn't want to die, he called out to my Father, saying, "Let your will be done, not mine."
Oh, that is this prayer. May your kingdom come and your will be done.
Jesus had been praying this way for so long that when his greatest test came, his arrest and execution, these were the words that carried him through.
And Jesus was delivered from evil when God raised him from the dead.
Right. In fact, it was through his act of self-giving love that God's forgiveness and heavenly kingdom came to earth. This is how God's holy name was restored.
So this prayer that Jesus taught his followers, it's a way to make Jesus' story our story.
The prayer invites us to daily trust God and to love and forgive each other so we can participate in the story of heaven and earth becoming one.
In the prayer that we just looked at, Jesus taught his followers to pray for God's daily provision.
And Jesus has a lot more to say about trusting in God and not in our stuff. And that's what we'll look at next.
So, what'd you think? So, some of the things that I like about the Bible Project videos as a whole is that they're a launching point. They just get the ball rolling, right? Very seldom is the entire teaching or point made there. This is the beginning of a much larger discussion. So you should take advantage of their app because it integrates other videos, visual commentary, and podcasts for more extended discussion. Because these that are from the Sermon on the Mount series, they're just the tip of the iceberg. So maybe we should look underwater, see what we might find. How Jesus taught his followers to pray, and what to pray about. So I want to start by acknowledging that beautifully sung prayer at the end in Hebrew. I did not expect it, and it caught my breath when I first heard it. And we'll probably discuss it at the end of the series. So as we've seen, this structure is essential because it's designed to grab our attention. It's intended to say, hey, pay attention. There's some design structure here. You know, we've seen that throughout the entire Tanakh, right? We see it again here in Matthew, especially when we're talking about some of the things that Jesus talked about. As we've discussed, this entire sermon that he has is centered here. As we've seen, the whole sermon has structure. The center of the structure is the prayer, and this is what Jesus is teaching. I like the Bible Project's title because it's better than the Lord's Prayer. It's just praying to our Father. And I like that. It's also deeper. And as we continue this discussion, because I think we're going to start to realize about some assumptions we have, and maybe we need to rethink. So the entire layout of this Sermon on the Mount is, of course, a chiastic structure. And we know from chiasms, the center is that focal point. It's all wrapped around these two halves in this prayer. As Tim said, the first half, well, it focuses on God's purposes in the world. The second half, well, they address our daily concerns. As John points out, it's a short prayer, and yet it's so much more. And as you know, I probably have a few upside down points to ponder. So let's start with a few thoughts, like, is this new? Stop and think about it. Is this really new? Because maybe we can look at this as a refocus. What I mean by that is, was the picture already there? It's not a new picture here. Maybe it's just lost what that picture might look like. Because yeah, things have gotten way off kilter. They've become distorted, confused, abused. Yet here are Jesus's points. Are they new? Are they just refocusing or addressing things that's already been discussed? Because that's something to ponder. And I think it can really be something to think about as we move forward with this. Because maybe I think we need to step back a little bit in our assumptions. Then maybe we can look at these with refocused eyes. It's kind of like a dirty lens. Maybe the lens just needs to be a little clearer. You know, when you have your glasses, they get dirty. You try to look at something, you can't see it. It's there. It's just not clear enough. So you realize my glasses are dirty. You take off your glasses, clean them, put them back on, and all of a sudden there it is. It's always been there, but now it's easier to see. And if you're reading, hopefully easier to understand. So my questions will be based on the clarity of the lens. Because what I mean by that maybe is we need to look a little more at our prescriptions, right? We're looking at through those assumptions, those prescriptions. Hopefully it'll make us see better. You know, for those of you that have been to an optometrist, you know what we're talking about. They go, they look, and they check your eyes out. Maybe this isn't the most fair analogy because probably a lot of you have never been to one. But when you go to an optometrist, they put you behind this machine, and then he starts flicking lenses in front of your eyes, switching them out. They go better, worse, better, worse, better, worse. All you're really doing in this procedure is determining when they're giving you two choices. Is it better or is it worse? Because we don't even know. I mean, we assume and hope that what they're giving us in the end is the best. A prescription is based on the best identification of what needs to be done. Yet, I think we've all done that in this test, merely say better or worse. But what's presented, is it clearer or not? And I think maybe we need to examine some of our assumptions, these things that are being brought to our eyes along this journey. Because the lenses that we're going to look through when we do this, right, it's going to cause us to look at things maybe a little bit differently. And it's probably best to start at the beginning because I like where Tim and John went with this one. It's our Father who is in the skies. So right off the bat, Jesus is not teaching them a new theological concept, right? This is not new to them. It's a separation of where we can't go, especially back then in their context and their understanding, and where He, God, must be. We're on earth. He's in the skies. Because oddly enough, today, at least we think we realize that God's not in the sky, at least not in today's context. In other words, if we're in a plane, we go above the clouds, or even above that into a different strata of the atmosphere. We don't bump into God. But their cosmos realms are heavens, skies, earth, occupied spaces, and water, those large bodies, well, that was chaos. Because Jesus is not giving them a cosmology lesson here. He's not a science lesson. This is not a different realm lesson. Jesus just says, you, Father, are there. We are here. And he reminds them that God, his Father, is in his space and that we're in our space. But we want his will and his authority to be enacted in both spaces. Now, here's where some assumptions are going to be challenging, at least with contemporary theological thoughts. So Tim makes one point that we often hear. God's will is always done in heaven, just not earth. Yet, we have an adversary. It's not worth a name. And those from that realm that chose to follow it. Because it was probably not the best of times there either, the stories that are attached to that rebellion, right? Yes, rebellion, not accepting God's will in heaven or earth, in both realms. And I think sometimes when we ask for that, we ask for God to be in charge, to submit to his will, that it may happen in both places, these two places, because they're connected by his will. We might not realize, even unintentionally, that justice comes with that. That's part of bringing him into the space. When we acknowledge him, we acknowledge his benevolence, his great mercy, and his justice. We will choose to be willing to submit, to be obedient, to represent the one whose will we're calling on in this prayer. I know that might be a little confusing, but my point isn't to confuse. My point is to cause us to not to make blanket assumptions, to repeat things without looking at what we repeat, what we mean by that, and maybe why. Because since this is going to affect things further down as we continue to discuss this. One of the things that I like about this is that identification is important when Jesus is teaching us. He includes his meaning in his teaching. Because the starting point is his Father's will. It's our look back, as theirs was, because it takes us back to the place where God attached his name and his will to those that chose to follow him. At the other mount, So we're going to continue with this discussion as we look more into these challenges, more into the practices, and more into our assumptions. I think this is going to be fun. So don't forget, the description below includes a link to the folks at the Bible Project and a link to the app so you can follow along and see each one as it premieres and all of the additional topics that it discusses. Because I think this will continue to be an exciting and thought-provoking journey into the Sermon on the Mount. And I just wonder what we're going to continue to uncover. So, thanks for being with us tonight with more on the Sermon on the Mount or another episode of The Dusty Feet.